Hi, welcome to Spotlight, your story, their lifeline, a mother-to-mother podcast. I'm Mimi.
And I'm Dobra, and together we are your hosts. In this mother-to-mother podcast, you will meet women sharing their stories of struggle, triumph, and hope. Our aim is to ensure that no woman ever feels alone.
Through their brave storytelling, these women become lifelines for others on their own journeys. So join us as we dive into the incredible stories that inspire and empower.
Welcome to Spotlight, where your story becomes a lifeline. This episode has been sponsored by Jakob's Kitchen and Befruitful.
Jakob's Kitchen is located in Edgware. We have everyday, fresh, homemade food. Come and try our Sunday salt beef bar, Monday Chinese night, Wednesday Indian night, Thursday Cholent night, and Friday's Shabbos food selection, all under the supervision of KLBD and Cardassia. You can take home or dine in. Use the code YACHAD and you will get 10% discount for any purchase. The discount code will be valid until the end of 2023. We look forward to seeing you.
Befruitful has premium fresh fruit and vegetables handpicked from the market daily. Befruitful is conveniently located in the heart of Edgware. You will receive friendly customer service and delicious fruit and veg under the hashgacha of KLBD. We look forward to welcoming and serving you.
This episode contains sensitive topics that are not suitable for a young audience and may be triggering for others.
Please note, identifying details and voice of our speaker today has been changed to protect her privacy.
Welcome to Spotlight.
Hi, nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too. We feel very, very honoured to have you on Spotlight. It's incredibly brave of you to come out here and share your story for lots of people, lots of listeners listening. And it's very likely there are people, as postpartum depression, PPD, otherwise known as, is extremely common. It's very likely there are people listening to it that have suffered or are suffering. And very likely there are people listening that are watching a loved one suffer. So thank you so much for doing this incredible service by sharing your story and giving awareness. Without further ado, then we'd be honoured to hear your story.
I think let's start from the beginning, either your childhood or before you got married.
So I'll start from when I got married. There's nothing that remarkable to say in my childhood.
Okay.
Other than the fact that maybe I was quite a sensitive child, maybe that does come into play. I will say this in terms of my childhood, because this did affect how I reacted further down the line. But I was the type of child that I was very sensitive, but I bottled up my emotions. Let's say if I had a bad incident in school, the shame didn't allow me to tell my parents what had happened. So if there was some instances of bullying, I experienced some mild bullying.
So you were more introverted instead of...
I was definitely more introverted, but quite sensitive at the same time. But my parents did not know, because even though I had a very warm, open, loving relationship with them, I felt like I was the problem, and therefore I kept it to myself. But other than that, I would say, Baruch Hashem, a very unremarkable childhood, very loving family. And I got married pretty young, as we do in our communities. And the plan was to move straight to Eretz Yisrael. And before I even left, I discovered I was pregnant. Now, Baruch Hashem, that's very common in our circles. However, I do think it needs to be addressed that for some people, this can be quite anxiety-inducing. You have this husband, you don't really know each other very well yet, and there's this huge step in life that you've just taken together, this huge responsibility coming your way at the same time. At least in my case, we were uprooting ourselves, moving to a new country, starting a new way of life. And it was very, very overwhelming. It was a huge simcha, and we were very, very grateful. But at the same time, I was scared. I was very, very scared. And my pregnancy, I was sick. I was this new Kala. I felt like he didn't know me very well, and he's not seeing me at my best already.
Yeah.
And
so you got pregnant straight after your wedding?
Basically, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. My due date was 9.5 months after my wedding.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary, and people have loads of great comments. I don't know about you, but I was flooded with all the amazing birth stories, which for someone who's not experienced birth, it's very, very scary.
Yeah.
And then also once we got to Eretz we were moving around a lot. There was just a lot happening in my life at once. We moved from apartment to apartment. You know how it can go. And there was just a lot going on in my life at the time. New marriage, new life, all of it. Very, very overwhelming.
How were your pregnancy symptoms?
They weren't the worst. They weren't the best. I was sick. I had the morning sickness.
First 3 months type.
First 3 months type, which, as I'm sure you know, can be challenging whilst you're learning to cook. Any smell can pretty much trigger, and I'm trying to impress this new husband with my gourmet meals. And I took on a lot as well. I felt like I had to host all the time. I'm saying this, I don't think this is anything out of the ordinary. I moved in the summer, it was very hot. Heatness was and still is a trigger for nausea for me. I'd started to develop terrible migraines, terrible back pains, you know, all within the range of normal, but we all know pregnancy is not easy. A significant part of my pregnancy was I had a health scare, a very scary health scare. Baruch Hashem, it turned out to be nothing serious, but at the time it was significant and it was scary. There was a lump in a certain part of my body that had to be checked out. And you know how these things go. This lump was discovered in my 8th month. So quite an advanced stage of pregnancy, very shortly after I had actually just moved apartment. And as you can imagine, it was terrifying. If this turned out to be something, how does this affect me? How does this affect the baby? You know, the future suddenly looked very, very uncertain. And these things it takes a while until you can get scans. Baruch Hashem, we were able to speed up the process, but I was very young.
How old were you?
I had just turned 20.
Okay, wow.
I had just turned 20.
Really young.
I was 19 when I became pregnant, but at that point I was 20 already. So I discovered this lump, and the doctors, you know, I'd gone to the doctor and I was hoping to hear, oh, it's nothing, but I was hearing, no, you've got to get this checked out. So it was a scary couple of weeks, which in the grand scheme of things is not that long, but at the time it felt like an eternity. I went for the scan. I was told, Baruch Hashem, it's benign. It's something that I have to come back to check on after pregnancy. But Baruch Hashem, it was not, our worst fears were put to rest. So obviously there was a huge relief, but I was very, very shaken. The experience really, really shook me up. I still remember going to have this scan, and I was surrounded by all these women who were so much older than me and looking at me like, why is she here? You know, I was highly pregnant. The whole experience left me very, very shaken. So that basically sums up my pregnancy.
And then came the birth.
Then came birth.
Were you nervous for the birth at all, or were you quite relieved to have to?
I was very nervous for the birth. It's a first birth. I mean, who isn't nervous for their first birth? You know, until that point, it's only imagination, and you hear all the stories. And like I said, I am quite a sensitive person. I take these things very much to heart, and so everyone's horror stories, I remembered them. So in a way, I actually, when contractions started, I was like, okay, here we go. You know, there was a measure of relief, yes. Yeah. But it was a long birth. It was a very, very long birth. Baruch Hashem, it was smooth. It went well. Baby was born. Baby was healthy. However, I lost a lot of blood at the end. I lost a lot of blood, and it was also
a normal delivery.
It was a normal delivery. Baruch Hashem, normal delivery. Really nothing, apart from the fact that it was long, which is normal again in the first birth. It was nothing too significant occurred there. The baby was born, a healthy baby, and the only thing is that I lost a lot of blood at the end, and that combined with a very long birth made me very, very weak, and the recovery of that was difficult. Every time I stood up, I fainted. And obviously that became quite scary. Every time I needed to go to the bathroom, I'd been put on 2 bags of IV. I needed to go to the bathroom a lot. Because of the blood loss, they hooked me up to a lot of fluids. I had to go to the bathroom a lot, and I couldn't go. And in the hospital I went to, I think they were very understaffed at the time. Happened to be a lot of births going on. So they just could not take me to the bathroom. The aftercare in that particular hospital, I've had babies since then, Baruch Hashem, I've never had this experience again. That particular hospital, the aftercare was really bad, in my opinion.
Did you have anyone out there that was vouching for you?
So I had my husband, but he was new to this as well. You know, we were both kind of like floundering a bit. We were both very new. We both didn't know what to expect. I didn't know to expect fainting every time I stood up, and I was sort of like, this wasn't happening to all the other women there. Why is this only happening to me? And when I saw as well all these other women walking around on their own without leaning on anybody, I was like, is there something wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Why am I so weak?
Have you always been like more in your childhood? Were you prone to hurting yourself? Were you more? Were you like that? You know, these kids who like always hurt themselves and they take time to recover from things, or were you like you just bounce back?
I was very average. I think I have the personality. Apparently, I come across as somebody quite
Fragile.
Fragile, yeah. I've been told that. Like people that get to know me, they're like, "Oh, you're a lot tougher than you look." But I do come across as quite fragile, quite delicate. I remember people, like somebody once called me like a Bambi, but like I'm not the toughest person in the world. Not by, like I said, I am more sensitive, but I'm nothing. I'm quite an independent person. And I truly was like, what's wrong with me? Why are all these women managing so beautifully and I can't? Why am I the only one that seems to be having all these issues? So I felt, it made me feel very inadequate. And I was like, this poor baby, I can barely take care of myself now and I have this baby to take care of. Did
you have a labour support or someone there?
I did have a labour coach during labour, but
And once the baby was born, that was it?
That was it. Once the baby was born, that was it. Happens to be as well, when I gave birth, it was a very busy time in hospitals. I almost got a bed in the hallway. But there was just this feeling that kept accompanying me of inadequacy, accompanied by a panic. How am I going to take care of this baby? So that was probably the beginnings of this feeling of I'm not cut out to be a mother. And I'd like to preface this, I have experience with babies, actually.
Nieces and nephews?
I have loads of nieces and nephews, and I've always loved newborns. I was always the aunt that held the newborn, put them to sleep. It wasn't that I didn't know what I was doing, but at that moment, I felt completely useless. And to make things worse, there was a nurse who decided, again, because I was coming across as this fragile person, it didn't help as well every time I stood up. She decided she was going to whip me into shape. She took me on as this personal project, and she did it in the most awful way. I was having a physical problem with feeding. There was a physical issue that I was in the middle of resolving, actually. And I was in the middle of resolving it successfully, more or less on my own. But it's something that took time. And in the meantime, I was asking the nurse. She decided she's going to help me with it. But one thing in particular stood out. At one point, she picked up my baby and she held him like a chicken. And I gasped. And she turned to me and she was like, do you think I don't know what I'm doing? I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this for years. And she said to me, it sounds better in Ivrit. Your edelkeit is bad for him. As a 20-year-old, hearing it from somebody who you're looking up to take care of you, who you're seeing as somebody who's experienced, she was the head nurse. You're seeing that she was the head nurse, probably in her 40s, and I saw her as this experienced person who knows what she's doing. I was basically told, you're going to be a terrible mother. And that is the thought that accompanied me throughout this whole thing, is that I am bad for this baby. That to me was the tipping point. I am bad for this child, and I'm not going to be able to provide for him.
You had a very unfortunate experience.
Yeah. I just would like to say this is not a typical experience at all. I've been to several hospitals since then. I've never had this experience again. I've actually only had support. My childbirth experiences have been very positive, but unfortunately, I was in a bad place at a bad time.
But can we just like zoom in on that? The fact that you have someone here who's so vulnerable.
Yes.
And it is so imperative that people speak to the mother in the correct way. You have to empower her. You have to encourage her.
Especially a first-time mother. She's overwhelmed enough as it is.
100%. And she needs to be told in the most delicate way that this is the correct way of doing it. You're doing a great job.
Yeah.
You're amazing.
Exactly. Tell her you're born to do this. We all know what it's like after birth. Our hormones are flying. I mean, the baby blues, we all talk about the baby blues. We should have that sensitivity in mind when we're talking to a new mother, that this is what she's going through. We have to be aware of the hormones, of the traumatic experience that she's probably had, because birth is, it is what it is. exhausting. She's also very sleep deprived, which makes you more vulnerable. We need to be aware when we're talking to new mothers that we're talking to a vulnerable person and treat them as such. Even when we're giving advice, like you said, do it in a delicate way, do it in a way that makes her feel empowered, do it in a way that makes her feel like she's got this. And if she doesn't have it, she will have it. And we've all been there. That she shouldn't feel that there's something wrong with her.
Exactly. And you can make it or break it.
You can.
A person around is literally the key to make it or break it with a mother. And
yeah, especially if it's somebody who's in like in a position above, let's say somebody with lots of children, because then you look at her like, oh, she's very seasoned, or a nurse, or a parent, or an older sibling.
But, I'm just thinking now, as someone who's got a lot of children, then they can actually be feeling extremely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And they need it as much.
True. 100%. Sure. Each one changes the whole dynamic. 100%.
It's such an important point of that. I think that people should know is what how much someone can make a difference to someone's birth story by encouraging them and giving them the right advice. And just empowering them.
Yeah.
That's why we have these incredible organizations like Mother to Mother to
yes,
help out.
Exactly. Yeah. Big shout out to Mother to Mother.
Yeah.
And I really could have done with something like that at the time. I didn't know about these resources.
They're incredible. After you give birth, they are incredible. They have night nurses. They send lunch every Monday, send food every single supper every single day.
And that's also something I want to touch on. Accept help. There's nothing shameful with getting the help. See it as an investment. Even if you maybe don't feel like you need it. Look, everyone decides what's good for them, what's in their budget. But I feel like there's such a pressure to be Superwoman. And we don't realize how much we might be paying for it down the line. And we're so blessed to have such an incredible community that has all these incredible chesed organizations. We should use them because they help us. A strong, healthy mother is only an asset to her family. And there should not be any shame in accepting help.
100%.
It's like they always say the same thing, like with a piggy bank. The fuller your piggy bank is, the more you can give.
The main thing is the kids are fed. How they get fed, who cares? As long as they're fed. If you can find a way that you can be calm and relaxed and get some rest, and there's somebody giving, take that offer. It's an investment for further down the line when you're rested, you've got your energy back. We shouldn't feel like we have to do it all. There's no shame in not being able to do it all, because you know what? No one can. No one can. And I'm actually going to touch on that as we carry on, how put together I looked and how people really thought I was doing it all. And probably the more put together I looked, the less I was really actually coping.
Opposite.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went home.
And I went home, and I guess that's when symptoms started kicking in quite early, I would say.
Of depression.
Yeah, I would say within the first 2 weeks. I mean, like I said, the nurse for me was that tipping point, because I almost feel like there was a shift in my mind.
How did you know it was depression? Like, how did someone know?
I didn't. I don't know if that's because I was in denial or if because, I don't know. To be honest, at that point, I was too exhausted to even think. But I knew something was wrong. I knew something was very, very wrong. I didn't enjoy anything. Like I said, I had lots of hobbies. My husband didn't know about them, but I had lots of hobbies. There were things that I was good at that I just didn't want to do. I stopped enjoying things. Some like food. Actually, I want to just say here, experiences are very, very personal. I'm not speaking for everybody. I'm just speaking for myself. But I remember like food I enjoyed, like a good piece of chocolate, almost tasted like ash. I just stopped enjoying things, and I would either feel this intense sadness or emptiness. I fell into the sleeping a lot, as much as I could with a newborn, and I wasn't eating. I just didn't have an appetite. I think that's more than the complete loss of appetite. Like I said, food was just tasting like ash.
Yeah, and after you give birth, normally you have a massive appetite.
A massive appetite, especially when nursing.
Yeah.
So when was that point that you realised, or was there a point, or was it maybe a family member?
Was there a point that you felt like I need to reach out for help, or?
So,
because that's the really hard thing to do.
We're talking over a very long period of time. It took a year. It took a year till I faced that I needed help. So it's hard to pinpoint when exactly it happened. There was just, I would say this was a year of a lot of despair. There was this feeling of despair, feeling of hopelessness, feeling of almost feeling like the sun's never going to shine again. A lot of the times I used to look out of the window and I truly felt like I was separate from the rest of the world. The rest of the world was carrying other lives. I was living in this alternate dark universe, looking in. It's very, very, and I found myself unintentionally isolating myself from my friends because there's this listlessness, this lack of energy, not able to pick up the phone to call somebody because there's nothing to talk about. You don't enjoy the conversation.
Did they notice that you weren't calling?
No, I don't think so. I was very good at putting on a front. I knew all the niceties to say. I would like to just mention as well, sorry, before we get back into that a big sign of postpartum depression, which I did not suffer from, but I know is common, is lack of connection with the baby. I had the opposite. I had almost too much connection, as odd as that is to say. But that baby was not allowed to cry.
Right.
If that baby cried, the world was ending.
It makes sense. You had this pressure from in pregnancy and birth that you had to be the best mother, and that went through, and it was all about the baby, really.
It was
sometimes people have depression and it's nothing to do with the baby, and they only realize afterwards, why am I not connecting with the baby? But here, all these thoughts and feelings and triggers were to do with the baby, and then afterwards I have to prove to the world that I am the best mother.
And I also I can't fail this baby again. This baby's been through enough. And that nurse's voice was in my head. I am bad for this baby. I am bad for this baby. I'm bad for this child. And I used to say, this kid is better off without me. I wish I could give him to my mother. She'd take better care of him than I would. Or I used to say to my husband, he'd be much better off if you were the one taking care of him. I was, in my mind, inadequate. I was bad for this child, and I was going to fail him, and he was doomed, and it was all my fault. And so it became with this intensity, which was exhausting, of this baby has to have all his needs met, and it has to be straight away. If this baby showed any signs of distress, it was triggering. All these thoughts came to the core of what an awful mother I am.
So this was for a full year?
This was for a full year. And I loved that baby almost too much.
Were your symptoms not bad enough? Were they very subtle?
No.
That for a whole year you didn't get even told to get help? Like, can you tell us a little bit about that period of time?
I was
also
hiding it.
One other thing, your husband as well. Did he? I mean, it's because it's a new relationship. Did he notice anything?
So he is the only one that noticed anything because I was so good at hiding it. I put so much effort into keeping up outward appearances. More effort than I put in now. That's for sure. But if anyone who saw me was like, oh yeah, she's got it all together. And I was very aware of that. I was hosting meals. And I had a big smile on my face the entire time. I discovered I'm a really good actress. I was hosting meals, big meals. If somebody had a baby, I was making them yeast cakes and I don't know what. What they didn't know is in order to make that yeast cake, I was calling my husband up from cradle and be like, I need you home. If I don't make this yeast cake, everyone's going to know what's going on. That was how I felt. I really had to keep up appearances. And that added a new level of pressure to an already very difficult situation. But my husband knew I was crying every single day, at least 5 times a day. I just was so sad. I was so miserable. I was like, the world just looked so bleak. It's funny to look back on it now because I almost can't relate to those feelings, but that's how it felt at the time. The world looked so dark. It was such a dark place to be. I truly felt like I would never, ever, ever experience happiness ever again. Everything was just so dark, and my husband didn't like. I'm actually quite a positive person. The feeling was new to me. I'm quite positive, and suddenly I was like, who am I? I truly felt like I didn't know who I was anymore. It wasn't like me to act like this, to react like this. Everything just looked so bleak. If an opportunity came my way, I was like, why try? There's nothing good's going to come out of it. I became so
negative,
so negative.
I've heard in the past, like people with depression, there could be some sort of self-harm or other things of trying to make yourself feel better take away the pain?
Yeah. So I did self-harm. I did do self-harm. I still have scars. But there's many reasons why people do self-harm. It could be, as like I said, there's this numbness. Very often, our bodies are incredible, how they react, how they self-preserve. But a big way that they do it is to stop feeling emotion, because it's just too painful. I'm having actually a hard time explaining how deep the pain is, because the pain is over nothing, almost. You just wake up in the morning and you're just like, why get out of bed? There's nothing to get out of bed for. And you can have there's this beautiful baby, and I had a good marriage. I have, actually, an excellent marriage and a very devoted husband. And you almost can't understand, why wouldn't you get out of bed? You've got all this, but you cannot enjoy it. You don't feel it.
So when did the self-harm start? For
me, the self-harm was more of a cry for help. I was attacking myself because I didn't know what else to do. I think because I didn't want to admit, my body, it was almost like I was forcing myself and everyone around me to realize something is wrong and I need help. It was a very subconscious thing.
Was your husband aware of this?
I did it in front of him. Oh, really? I think it was me crying to him for help.
At what point? In the year?
At least 9 months later.
Right.
I went for a long time without it. Mm-hmm. I guess it was a breaking point then. It'd been so long and it was not going away.
And was that the point that your husband realised that this is just not normal?
He himself is a very upbeat person. Upbeat, very laid back, very uncomplicated, and this is very complicated. This kind of thing wasn't even on his radar. It wasn't even on his radar, and he had a tremendous amount of sympathy, but he would like, okay, if we did this, will that make it better? He didn't understand that all his efforts weren't going to do it because he didn't realize that there was something much darker at play here, that there was a root to the problem.
Do you think that men are not educated enough in chosn lessons?
In his case, definitely not. In his case, he had no idea that pregnancy can bring this kind of hormonal imbalance. If you think about it, it takes 9 months for our bodies to do what it does, and then it goes back very quickly. I mean, of course, I think it's almost a miracle that people don't go slightly
100%.
Crazy.
100%.
No, and it's not going back to normal. It's nursing and there's other settled hormones.
Sleep deprivation. I mean, there's so much going on.
Contraception.
Exactly. Contraception's a big one.
Yeah.
And he didn't know. So I can only speak for him. But in his case, he had no idea postpartum depression was even a thing. He didn't know what hit him. And there was also this added level of pressure. I married a Masmid. Best boy in yeshiva. And I was told that many, many times. In fact, at my wedding, the Rosh Yeshiva's wife came up to me. She said, "You've got a great boy. You know, you need to live up to it."
Responsibility, yeah.
I felt this huge responsibility. And
that's
suddenly,
a lot of pressure.
It was a lot. And suddenly I was so needy. Suddenly I was so needy.
Right.
And I was calling him away for yeshiva. So you can imagine that.
Every time you felt very bad that you were pulling him away.
I was so ashamed.
Right.
I was so ashamed. Like it was like all these feelings stacking on top of each other. I needed him because I'm not managing. And because I'm not managing, I'm letting him down, letting my baby down. It was just all one big...
Yeah.
So, but I have to hand it to him, to his credit. He even though it was not on his radar, he kept a very open mind.
How many years ago is this that you got married and had your first baby?
So it was 8 years ago.
Okay, so it could be that there is a little more awareness
I'm hoping.
now.
I'm hoping.
Yeah. 8 to 10 years ago, things have changed.
Yes.
But, there's always needs to be a push for more awareness.
Yeah. My husband happens to be a very Tamimistic type as well. He's really not out there in the world. He's not the type of person that knows all these little... Very, very, very clever guy, but doesn't know all these pieces of information, if you know what I mean. So he would buy me cakes and all these kind of things, trying to make me happy, but it wasn't working. And I was just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. I think the breaking point for me was when he broke down. He was so worn down and so tired, and he just didn't understand. And he felt like he was failing. And I realized that something is wrong. Something is really, really wrong. And I can't remember who turned to my parents first, because I hid it from my parents. I hid it from everybody. I was putting across this perfect image. I have friends who could not believe what I was. I didn't tell. I told one friend, and that person was in shock.
So you didn't speak to your mum?
I didn't. No, I didn't speak to anybody. I wanted to be independent. I wanted to, you know. I think my husband turned to my parents first after he broke down, and just didn't know what to do anymore. And my parents were the one. They approached me and they were like, "You need to go for help." I was like, "No, I can do this on my own." I can't even remember what I was saying to justify my behavior, because I'm looking back, I was like, how did I think I could do this on my own? I was on the floor sobbing, hurting myself.
We'll be right back to this episode. Hi, I'm Danielle.
And I'm Aviva, and we are the founders of Mother to Mother, an organisation that supports and empowers women on their motherhood journeys. We offer a wide range of services to make sure that every mother can thrive, from emotional support services to mother and baby groups, practical help, health information, community kitchen, and more.
Mother to Mother builds communities of women to support each other. By tuning into our podcast, you have joined the Mother to Mother family today. Welcome, and enjoy the rest of this episode.
So your husband reached out to your parents and he explained
what was going on. And they explained to him that I need help. And that's the first time it put on his radar getting help. And I think he was almost relieved that, you know, that there's a way forward here. And I have to hand it to him. He was very open-minded, because I know people have a big stigma about going for therapy.
Were you nervous of people finding out?
Terrified. I still am, because I was like, I'm not crazy. There's nothing wrong with me.
Unfortunately, that is a big stigma.
It's a big stigma. I was like,
to get rid of. Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to have this mentally ill. I felt like going to therapy was a confirmation of this mentally ill label, and I didn't want to be that person. And it took a few months for them to convince me to go for help. I can't remember exactly how many, but eventually my mother found someone, and my husband made the phone call. He didn't ask me. He just came home and said, "You had an appointment tomorrow." And in a way, I was relieved. Like I said, the hurting myself was a cry for help. There was so much pain and so much despair. And suddenly there was a change. Maybe it wasn't a change I wanted, but the trajectory was starting to look a little different. And I went there and poured my heart out.
Did you connect straight away with this therapist?
You know, I was in such a low place.
They say therapists are like shidduchim.
They do. And it's true. It's true, it is. But truthfully, I was in such a low place and I was so desperate. I don't think I even gave much thought. It was just sort of like, if this person can help me, then here it is. And she said to me straight away, because I remember I just said, I'm so sad the whole time. I'm crying. I can't stop crying. And she told me straight away, you have postpartum depression. And the first feeling was relief.
Did you know what postpartum depression was?
Yes.
Did you know anyone that's had it?
No, I read an article many years beforehand.
Before you'd seen this lady, did you ever think, do I have this?
Yes.
Postpartum depression?
I did. And
did.
Immediately was like, nope, not me.
Right.
I'm not that... I'm not. It was not so much. It was like I'm not going there. It was almost like I felt like I could wish it away.
Can we pause on that?
Yeah.
Isn't it crazy how the world is, and I'm hoping that it's changing, but postpartum depression is not the person. It's an illness that has come and is masking over them for a period of time. But it's not the person. The person has a personality behind them. They are an incredible, amazing personality. And this is a monster that is taking rent space for a little bit of time, and sometimes a lot of time. And you are anonymous today because there is a stigma. And we're not here to break stigmas. We're not here to stop stigmas. We're here to share stories, and you are bravely sharing your story. This is not their identity. This is nothing. This is something that has just taken rent space for a little bit of time.
And it's the same as a physical illness. It's a chemical imbalance in the brain. if you get it, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you if you're more vulnerable to it. Because of my birth story, made me more vulnerable. Those were all very external factors.
Exactly.
But it made me more vulnerable. Nothing wrong with me.
Nothing at all.
I mean, in my opinion. But
Oh, there's something wrong with all of us. Eh?
exactly. But you know what, though? I internalized that there was something wrong with me. Everybody else seemed to be Superwoman. I had to be Superwoman too.
Yeah.
But you put on a facade. Is that the word, facade?
Yeah.
You put on a front, and you looked incredible.
I did. I looked way better then than I do now. Trust me.
Because you were so nervous.
I was so nervous. I had to keep up a very perfect image. And in doing so, I isolated myself from people.
Can you spot someone that...
I can and I have. There has been times when I have seen somebody... Obviously, it's more likely to happen with somebody that I know well. But I've seen there's a certain emptiness in the eyes, a certain pressure that I notice on them if things are going a little, haywire, not according to plan. And I have at times plucked up the courage to approach these people, or if it's somebody that my husband knows their husband, and tell him, just so you know, I know that something's going on, and if you need to send the kids over or something, I know. And the responses have been quite interesting. It's been like, but how?
Yeah.
Takes one to know one, unfortunately, because it's very often mimicking behavior that I did, such as isolation from friends. It's how I spotted a friend going through it because she suddenly wasn't answering phone calls. And I knew it wasn't because of any fallout, but you isolate yourself. You can't help it. You don't enjoy conversation. You're scared of slipping up. You've got this incredible pressure. You almost don't have the head for anything else. This pressure, this pain, you don't really have the head for all these very mundane things.
Yeah. So I wonder when there's a difference between like postpartum depression and then hopefully someone recovers from that. Yeah. But then what's the difference between that and depression? And
clinical depression. It's a good question. And I don't actually know the answer, but I do know there is a difference. I guess because one is very much tied to
after birth. Right.
Symptoms-wise, I imagine it's probably quite similar. There's just, despair, emptiness, loneliness, pain. So I keep saying pain. It's so hard for me to put this feeling into words because we're all sad. We all go through, it's not just sadness. It's complete despair, complete hopelessness. Sadness is something, it passes with time. We can find an activity to help us distract our minds from this. You cannot distract yourself. Or you should certainly try to, but it doesn't pass. It stays. I used to wake up in the morning with a pit in my stomach. I used to ask myself, why? What's the point? So when she told me I have postpartum depression, my first feeling was relief that there is something at play here. And it's not that I'm a bad person, because I feel like the worst person in the world. It's not that I'm a bad person. Something's happened.
It's like a diagnosis. So you feel like, okay, there's something to work with.
And that means there's a way out.
Yeah.
But then very quickly were feelings of shame. Why I felt shame, I don't know. I guess it's the stigma.
Was that when you were going for help?
That was when I was going for help. I had shame before. Now the shame changed to no one can know that I have postpartum depression.
Beforehand, no one could know that I'm not functioning.
Exactly.
Now it's got a label. So basically, it's really the same.
Yeah. Maybe the reasons are slightly different, but the actions were the same.
It now has a label.
And so I carried on working myself to the bone to keep up appearances. And it got to a point actually where I was too exhausted from it all. I flew to spend a Yom Tov with my in-laws and I was exhausted. I can't begin to tell you how physically draining it is. It affects the body physically and it affects the body emotionally, but also physically. I suffered from terrible headaches. I was constantly ill. It takes a toll on the body. And it's exhausting to keep it up. And, we were around the family and people were having a good time. And I at times just wanted some quiet just to recenter myself. And it was embarrassing. I wasn't always feeling able to get up and go help. Or let's say there was someone that was pregnant. It's expected of me to take care of the kids. It's expected of me to help around the house, and I wasn't always capable of it. There was, again, this added level of pressure to keep up appearances. But on Yom Tov, when you're staying in a house with lots of people, that's like times a million, because you're constantly on display. And at one point, the pressure got too much for me. And I just said to my husband, I was like, I don't want to be there when it happens, but tell your mother. Just tell your mother. Just so one person should understand, I should have somebody to hide behind. And he did. And my mother-in-law was shocked. Again, that is how well I played the part. She's like, but she's so together. Out of everybody, her? Like, you have no idea. You have no idea. And then there was, because I had waited so long to get help, I'll just say this, telling her, everybody, obviously, everyone's family circumstances are different. And I do think you should be careful with who you trust your information with, because not everybody is able to be supportive and not everybody understands it. People, unfortunately, play into the stigmas. I know of cases where that's happened, where husbands have played into the stigmas, and I don't blame them. But, you have to go about this wisely, obviously. But for me, telling her was such a weight off my shoulders. It gave me, she stepped in, she took the baby. So my husband could go learn, I could go rest. Or if I just wasn't feeling like being around people, if I was feeling sad, I could step away, have some privacy. And for me, that was huge. And there was someone else to turn to when things were hard. And for my husband, that was a big thing. For my husband, he finally now had someone. Because until then, he had been all on his own. And the husband gets neglected here. His wife is... This is not the person he married, and he has to assume all these extra responsibilities. And on my wishes, had all this He's like, there's nothing wrong if things aren't perfect. It's normal. But I was like, it's not normal. Things have to be perfect. So he was taking on all my mishigassen. So for him to finally have someone to turn to that he's close to was huge. And I was happy for him that he was fine. I didn't see that that's what he needed, and I felt terrible. But I was happy when the time came that he was able to have someone too, because we neglect the men. They're suffering just as much. It's a different suffering, but it's a suffering nonetheless. And they don't get, everyone's so busy helping, everyone who knows is so busy helping me, we forget about them. So that was a huge help. That was a huge help. And again, a confirmation of what a great actress I am. So I went for therapy, and we began to try all the different methods, CBT. But it got to the point, I'd been suffering for so long, and the longer you leave it untreated, the worse it gets, and the longer it takes to recover. And eventually we realized, because I was still self-harming when there would be triggers. If things got too overwhelming, I would self-harm. If something painful happened, I would self-harm. If I wasn't managing with a baby that day and I was just this terrible mother, I took it out on myself. I was taking it out of myself, and the self-harming was slowly getting a little worse. But it got to the point where she suggested to me, perhaps you should think of medicating. And I was like, oh, it's bad enough that I'm here.
You weren't medicated until then?
No.
Is that not the first port of call, that someone is medicated?
You need the patient's consent. They can't push it on you, as far as I'm aware.
How many months into therapy was this?
I think 3.
And she had suggested it and you didn't want it?
I said, no way. I was like, 1 sigma's enough.
Yeah.
I don't need 2.
Yeah.
So I was like, no. I was very, very, very headstrong about it. But it got to a point where she spoke to my husband and she spoke to my parents. And they all basically began a campaign. My husband went, took me to a doctor who also said, you have to, wrote me a prescription. And I refused to take it. My husband took me to my parents. They sat me on the couch, and I was sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And they were explaining to me, do it for the child. Because do it for the child. And whilst the pill was practically pushed into my mouth, it wasn't actually, obviously I had to open my mouth and swallow it with water. But it was held in front of me. I was like, think of, you're doing this. I have to say, they said it to me with chokhmah, because they told me, you're an excellent mother. Think of this as you would do anything for him. Anything. This is something you could do for him. And that's what got through to me. That and my husband, I saw tears in his eyes. And I realized that I have a responsibility to my family. And that was actually somewhat empowering, to take some responsibility back, to take some control back. Because you feel so, this was something that I could do. And I saw it as even though it was a selfish act, at the time, I saw it as a selfless act. And obviously, once I took it, that was it. You can't just, it's something that you have to be weaned off.
What was the fear of taking it? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, it was, am I that gone that I have to take pills to fix my head? There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not, again.
You honestly didn't think there was anything wrong?
I knew there was something wrong, but for some reason that felt
thought
extra.
Therapy could do it all? I
think the words I was using was like, what's next? Are you going to lock me up in a mental institution? Is that where I belong now? Do I belong in that part of society? I felt like if I took it, it'd be an admission that I no longer belonged with the mainstream society.
And now looking back, talking to people that should be taking a pill to help them.
What I would say is the situation hasn't changed. You're taking it because of what's happening. It's not the pill that's made you where you are. It's what's happening. The pill hasn't changed what's happened. And if you believe that you still belong in mainstream society with all that happening, taking the pill doesn't change that. It's just a mindset.
Yeah.
It's just a mindset. But at the time, it felt like an admission. And I think I even said, I was like, that's it, I'm crazy. It was humbling. It was humbling, but you know what? I think I'm able to say that because I went through that. It made me obviously look at people that take medication regularly differently, and there's nothing. Who are we to say because they take it that they don't belong in regular society? But the stigma is strong. The stigma is strong. We don't talk about these things, so we don't know other people that, it used to be that being a diabetic was a stigma. Now we're much more open. We don't see the diabetic as somebody who has something wrong. But with this, we don't talk about this openly. So I felt like I was other. I was different.
Yeah.
And the pill, then what does it actually do? Just for people out there listening so that they should know how important it is. Because I think this is such an incredible awareness.
Yeah, and also how long did you have to take the pill for?
So I'd like to preface this that not everybody needs to. Mm-hmm. Not everybody needs to. With therapy, it's really, like you say, it's like a shidduch. You need to find your mode. It depends on the severity. A lot of factors here. Not everyone responds in the same way to medications. Some people respond very well to CBT. There's lots of methods out there, and everyone has to find theirs.
There are a few types of pills as well.
Yes.
So, did you have to try?
No, I had a very good response.
That's amazing.
It was incredible.
What does the pill actually do?
So depression is a chemical imbalance. So the pill, back to the diabetic analogy, a person's missing insulin, so they inject themselves with insulin. The pill balances out the chemicals, so we've got the right amount of, somebody who's more educated than me will know this, serotonin, I don't know the name of all this.
Oxytocin,
dopamine.
Always said that one.
I don't know. Please don't take what I'm saying at face value. I'm just trying to sound very educated here. But it brings the chemical balance back. But the pill doesn't work on its own. You still have to do the therapy because the goal is to manage without it. I still had to do the therapy. What the pill had to do was take the edge off so that I could take the reins back, get the control back in order to do the work, in order to come out of this.
Be focused.
Yeah, it helped me. It gave me the strength to, it balanced my chemicals enough that I was able to, okay, now I can do the hard work to get better. And it was a long process. I was on that pill for a year. It was a year of a lot of very hard work, and there were a lot of ups and downs. It was not smooth sailing. It's not a magic wand.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
So the pill takes about a month for it to kick in. So I went on something else at the same time in order to because I had to get back on my feet quickly. But that came with side effects, which were horrible. It made me nauseous. It made me very tired. But it was necessary. I got on that within a couple of days. My husband was back on a semi-regular schedule. I was very embarrassed of his chavrusas. To this day, I cannot look at those chavrusas in the face because they knew he wasn't there. But he was able to, some semblance of a structure and a routine came back. And I was able to pull myself together a bit. And I was able to I went to the therapies, and within a month, the pill that I was taking regularly kicked in. And it was like a fog had been lifted from my mind. It was slow, but very gradually I felt, you remember I said that I felt like I was separate I was in this very dark hole, watching the rest of the world go by, leaving me behind, almost completely isolated. I felt like this fog was lifting and I was coming out. And not just the shell of me, but body and soul. But it was a roller coaster. There were good days, there were terrible days. And those terrible days were terrifying because I was like, oh my gosh, am I slipping back? There was this panic. And for my husband, he was traumatized from this. If I was somewhat sad, he was like falling over himself. So I can't say it was normal because we had to get past the trauma of the postpartum depression. And that was a whole thing in and of itself. He had to learn how to relate to me like a normal person, that people can have bad days and people can be in bad moods. For me, if I was in a bad mood, it was like, oh no, this must be fundamentally terrible. I must be depressed because I'm feeling something negative.
So because you had the baby straight away, you hadn't...
She was just being a woman. I was
just being a woman again.
Yeah.
But I felt like, no, I have to be on all the time. And if I'm not, then I'm slipping. So there was getting over the postpartum depression and also getting over the trauma of the postpartum depression. And it took... getting over that took a long time. By the time... my son was, I was on that pill for a year. I was able to get off it when he was 2, but I would say I only got out, it was very gradual, so it's very hard to pinpoint, but by the time I had his hashgacha, I was able to look at myself in the mirror and say, I'm on the other side. And I'd like to say this, with postpartum depression, recovery, if you identify it and you treat it, recovery, the chances of recovery are way better than clinical depression. You can have a full recovery.
When you had more children,
were
you nervous that it would come back?
So that's actually interesting. So when I became pregnant again, I was terrified. But I kept up with my therapist, who was very reassuring, and she said to me, you know the signs, you catch it early, you end it early. So I had that reassurance, and I had my husband had been my rock throughout this whole thing, and he was he believed it. He very much, he's like, the therapist, she got you out, trust her. He truly empowered me and made me feel like I could do it. I mean, the words were, and I really feel like we need to tell this to mothers all the time, like, you can do anything. You really can. There was you hear something enough, you believe it. Now, that pregnancy actually ended in a miscarriage. And it was devastating, but I didn't slip into a depression.
So how far along? Sorry.
It was early. Uh-huh. But I would have thought that's something that ended badly, and I've had this history, I would get there. And that was actually, it ended in depression, and actually quite a lot happened in my life at that point. Quite a lot of scary things. And I didn't slip into a depression. I actually very much rose to the occasion. So that experience was I was like, this isn't a life sentence.
You can do it.
Yeah, it can do it, and it doesn't have to, just because it doesn't have to happen again.
Yeah.
Do you feel that the therapy, that what you had been through with having PPD, then going through that therapy strengthened you as a person?
100%.
And everything now, having that miscarriage and all the other things that came along with it at that point of time, that would have put somebody into a dark place, technically.
Absolutely.
Do you think that helped you?
100%. First of all,
were you using those tools that the therapist had given you?
Therapy makes you incredibly self-aware. It's just something therapy does. It makes you very in touch with your emotions, and it's actually an incredible skill to have. It's an incredible skill to have because you become very aware of what triggers you. You become very aware of what situations to avoid. You become very aware of how you make yourself feel better, how to take care of yourself. So maybe there were times in my life where I could have slipped, but I have all these incredible tools at my disposal that I would not have had otherwise. And also, you don't go through something like this without becoming strong. I can honestly say I'm a very, very different person on the other side than I was then. I became a lot more resilient. I don't think my character changed, but I think my coping skills changed. I became very, very resilient. I'm actually known as somebody who keeps a pretty cool head now in a tough situation. And I attribute it to that. It's sort of like, I've been through Gehenna, and that came out okay. And that attitude has stayed with me. Like, I've done it before and I can do it again. So in a way, that made the postpartum depression into a positive experience.
Can you talk to somebody now? There's somebody listening to you right now that is going through it. Someone currently is going through it, and she's listening to you and she's thinking, you are incredible. Someone's going through it right now. Talk to them.
If I can do it, you definitely can. I am not the strongest person in the world. I'm not the toughest person in the world. I'm not the biggest coper in the world. I am such an average Joe. Believe me, if I can do it, anybody can. And we are so blessed to be living in this time where we have so many resources. Don't deny yourself the help you deserve. There is nothing wrong with you. There is seriously nothing wrong with you. This has happened to you. This is external from you. This is not your fault. You are not a bad person. You deserve to get the help that you need. Just like you deserve to go to a doctor when you've come down with the flu or COVID or anything. We have so much at our disposal, not just the methods I've been through. There's so much out there. And you can have such an enriched life, not just despite it, but because of it. Just reach out for help. Your life will change for the better. Your life, your family's life, you will be I truly think this has made me into a better mother. I have so much more empathy for my children because I've been through something. You will be a better person for it, and you'll actually be able to one day. I know life seems very dark right now and things will never get better, but one day you will be able to turn around and say, Hashem, thank you. Because if not for this, I would not be here.
That's really incredible.
Yeah.
And that's really, I'm moved. And I think that anybody can take this in any situation that they may be going through. Then maybe people can tap into that.
I would like to add one more thing as well. Forgive yourself. Don't beat yourself up, because that was definitely something that I struggled with. There was so much bad enough that I was running away from other people's judgment. One person's judgment I could not run away from was my own. And believe me, I was my harshest critic. I was brutal to myself. I mean, bad mother, that's enough to send anybody off the edge. Bad mother, bad person. Look at what you're doing to your husband. Look at what you're doing to your family. Look what you're doing to your life. Just forgive yourself. This is not your fault.
It's not you.
It's not you, and it's not your fault. It's not your fault this happened to you, because I also blame myself it happened to me. If I wouldn't be such a fragile person, if I wouldn't be this, if I would just do this better. It's not your fault.
It can happen to anyone.
It can happen to anybody. It probably is happening to people. You are not weak because of it. This is something that happened to you, just like somebody was born with blue eyes.
Do members of your family know now, or is it still your mum and mum-in-law?
Certain members of my family know.
You discuss it with them, or?
It took many years till I was able to get to that point, because...
Meaning, I'm just asking because that has the stigma, gone away a bit. Do you know what I mean?
I definitely, in and of myself, I'm now comfortable with it. Like I said, because I truly believe it shaped me. Obviously, somebody who doesn't know me, I'm not going to, because they don't know me. But people that I'm very, very comfortable with, and even people I'm very comfortable with, I'm still selective. People that I feel will understand, I think is a better way to put it. People that I feel will understand that this doesn't change anything about me, I'm very open about and can even joke about it with them. And I've been able to help a family member or two that have actually gone through it. And there has been one case where I noticed somebody was going through it. I didn't approach them about it, but I was mindful to help where I could, and just I made excuses of why I was doing whatever I was doing. Oh, I'm passing by anyway, or I have extra cake. I made too much cocoa this week, whatever it was. So with certain people, I am comfortable to discuss it. And of course, if if I can help somebody, which is a big why I took on this podcast, because for a long time, I mourned the fact that I missed the first 2-3 years of my son's life. You know, and marriage. I missed that sweet Shana Roshana thing. Look, you know what?
You can have it after.
You can have it after. I gained incredible communication tools. Like I said, my relationship actually matured quite quickly, and I think there's a lot to be said about that. We became very comfortable with each other very, very fast. I mean, it put my husband through the ringer. It tested him, and you can imagine how much respect I have for him because of it. So I was like, I knew he was a great person, but I didn't realize how great. He was so young, and he was a real man. It obviously made me appreciate him in a way that I don't think I could have gotten to. I mean, I'm not doing him justice in this podcast, but I guess that's another topic of how he coped and how well he did with so little support. Laughter is truly the best medicine. And I was still able to laugh. Those times were not as often as I would like, but there were those moments, and you know what? I held on to them for dear life.
Wow, it's a really heavy episode. It is so brave of you to come out here and share your story. I'm emotional listening to it, and I have a triple newfound respect for you. On that note, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode on Spotlight. If you are affected by any of the challenges we have discussed, then please visit www.mtom.org.uk/podcast for guidance on where to find help.
Do you also have a story to share? Be in touch if you'd also like to be a lifeline for others by sharing and empowering women across the world. Podcasts at mtom.org.uk.